Texas is the second largest state in the country. Nearly 270,000 square miles of wide open land. You'd think with all that space, you could go pretty much anywhere you wanted. You'd be wrong. From nuclear weapons facilities, to ancient ruins, to military installations guarding some of the most sensitive operations in the country, the Lone Star State has a surprising number of places where showing up uninvited could ruin your entire year. So today, we're counting down 13 forbidden places in Texas you're not allowed to visit. Number 13, Toyah High School, Toyah, Texas. Let's start with something that sounds harmless, but absolutely is not. The ghost town of Toyah sits in Reeves County in far west Texas, about 40 miles west of Pecos, once a thriving railroad town in the late 1800s and early 1900s, a supply point for the Southern Pacific Railroad and a hub for cattle ranching and farming in that corner of the state. Toyah is now largely empty. Just a handful of residents, a gas station, and a collection of crumbling buildings baking in the desert sun at an elevation of about 2,600 feet. One of those buildings is the old Toyah High School, and it has become something of a magnet for urban explorers, photographers, and people who think wandering into a structurally compromised ruin sounds like a great afternoon. It does not sound like a great afternoon. It sounds like a lawsuit or a funeral, depending on which section of the floor gives way first. The building is officially condemned and off limits. The structure is genuinely dangerous. The roof has partially collapsed, the floors are rotting, and the walls have been slowly doing what walls do when nobody maintains them for several decades. Local law enforcement has made it clear that unauthorized entry is trespassing, and Reeves County is not a place where anyone is particularly patient about that kind of thing. You can photograph it from the road. You can admire it from a safe distance. You can even film a short documentary about how sad and beautiful it looks deteriorating in the West Texas heat. What you cannot do is go inside. People still try to document the building's interior, and the county still makes it very clear that the legal consequences of doing so are completely avoidable, if only someone would read the sign. Number 12, Goodfellow Air Force Base, San Angelo, Texas. Goodfellow Air Force Base sits just outside San Angelo in the heart of West Texas, and its primary mission is training, specifically training the people who are responsible for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operations across every branch of the United States military. The 17th Training Wing at Goodfellow trains approximately 12,000 personnel per year in cryptologic analysis, imagery analysis, and fire protection, among other specializations. If that list made you feel vaguely like you weren't supposed to know those things, that's because the work that happens inside Goodfellow is exactly as sensitive as it sounds. This is not a base where you roll up, flash a smile at the gate, and ask for a tour. This is a base where access is controlled, credentials are checked, and the entire point of the operation is to train people who handle information that the United States government would prefer enemies of the country not to have. Goodfellow is also notable for hosting the Department of Defense's Fire Protection Training Program, the only DoD facility that certifies fire protection specialists for all military branches. Every military firefighter in the American Armed Forces has passed through a training pipeline connected to this base. That is an enormous operational footprint for a base that San Angelo locals describe, with some amusement, as tucked quietly into a city famous primarily for sheep ranching and lake fishing. The base is named after Lieutenant John J. Goodfellow Jr., a World War I aviator from San Angelo, who was killed in action in 1918. The people who train at the base that bears his name are learning to do things that are, in a very different way, equally consequential. Civilians wandering in unannounced would not be welcomed with open arms. This is one of those situations where the sign at the gate is actually the friendliest part of the security apparatus. Number 11, Red River Army Depot, Texarkana, Texas. Tucked into the far northeastern corner of Texas, right on the border with Arkansas, the Red River Army Depot has been quietly doing critically important work since 1941. The depot is responsible for the repair, overhaul, and maintenance of ground combat vehicles, Bradley fighting vehicles, M1 Abrams tank components, mine-resistant vehicles used in active conflict zones, and other military hardware that you have almost certainly seen in news footage from the world's more troubled regions. The depot covers a substantial area in Bowie County and operates under strict security protocols that are essentially the same logic as, "These are weapons, and we would prefer unauthorized people not have access to them." That's not complicated. It's just common sense wearing a federal badge. What makes Red River interesting beyond its operational mission is its resilience. It was established during World War II and has survived multiple rounds of the base realignment and closure process, a periodic federal review that has shut down dozens of major military installations around the country. The fact that it's still operating means it's still considered essential to the Army's sustainment network. The depot primarily serves the TACOM Life Cycle Management Command, which sounds administrative, but is actually the organization that keeps combat vehicles in fighting condition for troops deployed around the world. There's also an environmental dimension worth noting. Red River has dealt with contamination issues over the decades from various industrial processes, and cleanup operations have been an ongoing part of its footprint. None of that makes unauthorized access safer. It makes it less so. Visiting without authorization means interacting with federal law enforcement, which is not how most people want to spend their Tuesday afternoon in Texarkana. Number 10. Joint Base, San Antonio. Multiple locations, San Antonio, Texas. Joint Base. San Antonio is the largest joint military base in the entire Department of Defense. It consolidates 3 major installations: Fort Sam Houston, Laughlin Air Force Base, and Randolph Air Force Base, along with Camp Bullis and several smaller annexes, all under a single installation command. More than 266 mission partners operate within the JBSA umbrella, supporting military medicine, Air Force basic training, pilot instruction, and intelligence operations simultaneously. In terms of sheer scope, JBSA supports more than 80,000 jobs in the San Antonio region and contributes approximately $30 billion annually to the local economy. Fort Sam Houston is the home of Army medicine. It's where military medical training happens, where the Army Medical Center of Excellence operates, and where people learn to keep soldiers alive in the field under conditions that are the opposite of ideal. Laughlin is where every single Air Force enlisted recruit goes for basic military training, around 35,000 airmen per year. Randolph is where pilots learn to fly. All 3 have been operating continuously since World War II and have significantly expanded their missions since then. All of it is restricted. All of it requires authorization to enter. The people inside are doing serious work, and showing up unannounced at the gate is the kind of thing that results in a very educational conversation with security personnel that does not end the way you hoped. San Antonio is an extraordinary city to visit. The River Walk is genuinely wonderful. The food is among the best in the state. The Alamo is right there. The military installations, however, are not part of the tourist package, and the combined security apparatus of 3 major Air Force and Army installations sharing a single command structure ensures that remains the case. Number 9. Laughlin Air Force Base, Del Rio, Texas. Laughlin Air Force Base sits near Del Rio in southwest Texas, close to the Mexican border and about 150 miles west of San Antonio. It holds a specific distinction that is worth knowing. It is the busiest pilot training base in the entire United States Air Force. During weekdays, Laughlin handles more flight operations than any other airfield in the country. Hundreds of student pilots are in the air at any given time, flying T-6 Texan trainers and T-38 Talons, learning the skills that will eventually take them into combat or commercial aviation, depending on which direction their career goes. On an average weekday at Laughlin, the sky above Del Rio looks like controlled chaos, because it is deliberately exactly that. The base was established during World War II and is named after First Lieutenant Jack Laughlin, a Del Rio native who was killed in action in January 1942, just weeks after Pearl Harbor. He was 23 years old. He never saw the base that bears his name. The pilots who train there now are carrying on something that started in the urgency of that period and has not stopped since. Because of the volume and intensity of flight operations at Laughlin, the security and access restrictions are particularly serious. The airspace above and around the base is tightly controlled by the FAA. The ground facilities are restricted to authorized personnel. Del Rio itself is a small border city with a lot of character, excellent Tex-Mex food, and Amistad National Recreation Area just to the west, all of which are available to everyone. The base, as always with these installations, is a different matter entirely. If the sheer quantity of aircraft in the sky at any given moment doesn't make it obvious that this is not a drop-in kind of situation, the security at the gate certainly will. Number 8. Fort Bliss, El Paso, Texas. Fort Bliss is the largest installation in Army Forces Command and the second largest in the entire Army, covering approximately 992,000 acres across the El Paso area and into New Mexico. To put that in perspective, it is bigger than the state of Rhode Island. It is so large that it contains the largest maneuver area of any military installation in the United States, and it provides the largest contiguous block of restricted airspace in the continental country, used for missile and artillery training and testing. The 1st Armored Division is headquartered at Fort Bliss, along with air defense artillery units and missile defense systems that are about as far from something tourists can wander through as it gets. The base was originally established in 1848, named after Lieutenant Colonel William Wallace Smith Bliss, who served as adjutant to General Zachary Taylor and was known for his brilliant administrative mind rather than battlefield glory. The base has been in continuous operation since, adapting from frontier defense to the very different requirements of 21st century military operations. The training ranges at Fort Bliss are genuinely dangerous. Live fire exercises happen regularly across an enormous area of desert terrain. The security protocols at the gates are thorough, the perimeter is monitored, and the federal restrictions on trespassing on military land are not things that local authorities treat with any flexibility. Biggs Army Airfield operates within the Fort Bliss perimeter, adding aviation operations to the already extensive list of reasons unauthorized visitors are not welcome. Every sign, every fence line, and every uniformed guard at the gate communicates the same message with perfect clarity. There is no ambiguity about whether you are supposed to be there, and if you are not, you are not. You can visit El Paso, which is a fascinating city on the Texas-New Mexico border with excellent food and a rich history on both sides of the Rio Grande. The Franklin Mountains State Park runs right through the city and offers hiking with remarkable desert views. The base itself is a different matter entirely, and at 992,000 acres, it occupies so much of the surrounding landscape that its presence is hard to ignore even when you're nowhere near a gate. Number 7. Sheppard Air Force Base, Wichita Falls, Texas. Sheppard Air Force Base in Wichita Falls is the largest air education and training command installation in the United States, and it trains an extraordinary range of military technical specialists through its 82nd Training Wing. Approximately 60,000 students pass through Sheppard each year, learning everything from aircraft maintenance to healthcare to financial management for the U.S. military. What makes Sheppard particularly interesting as a restricted site is the NATO connection. Sheppard is home to the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program, which means that NATO member country pilots train alongside American pilots at this facility. It is the only program of its kind in the world, and it has been producing Allied military pilots since 1981. Students from more than a dozen NATO member nations, including Germany, Italy, Portugal, Greece, and others, train together under a unified program, which means the security requirements at Sheppard extend beyond just American military standards. The base is named after Senator Morris Sheppard of Texas, who served in the Senate from 1913 until his death in 1941. He is perhaps best remembered as the principal author of the 18th Amendment, Prohibition. Make of that what you will. The base that carries his name today is considerably livelier than the country he helped temporarily go dry. Wichita Falls itself is a mid-sized North Texas city with its own character and its own things worth seeing. The military installation that dominates its southern edge, however, is not one of them, at least not without the proper authorization. The combination of NATO security protocols, active flight training involving international military personnel, and federal trespassing law produces an environment that is thoroughly inhospitable to uninvited guests, regardless of how curious or well-intentioned those guests might be. Number 6. Johnson Space Center, Houston, Texas. The Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in Houston is one of the most famous scientific facilities in the world, and a meaningful portion of it is accessible to the public. Space Center Houston, the adjacent visitor complex, draws hundreds of thousands of people every year and gives guests an impressive look at the history and ongoing reality of America's space program. Real Saturn V rockets, mission control replicas, astronaut training exhibits, and more. The parts you cannot visit are the parts that matter most to the people who work there. The actual operational areas of JSC, the mission control centers, the laboratories where spacecraft are developed and tested, the neutral buoyancy lab where astronauts train underwater to simulate weightlessness in a 6 million-gallon pool, the areas where hardware for active missions is handled, are restricted to credentialed personnel. The airspace above and around the active facility is regulated. The security on the campus perimeter is federal. NASA has been more open with the public than almost any other federal scientific agency, and Space Center Houston is genuinely excellent and worth your time. But the operational side of JSC is a workplace where the stakes involve human lives, active mission hardware, and systems connected to the International Space Station. The restricted areas exist for that reason, and they are enforced with the same seriousness that the work inside them demands. The neutral buoyancy lab alone, where astronauts spend hours underwater practicing spacewalk procedures on full-scale mock-ups of ISS components, is one of the largest indoor pools in the world. You can read about it. You cannot walk in and look at it. The difference between the visitor center and the working campus is about 10 minutes of driving and an entirely different level of access authorization. Number 5. Dyess Air Force Base, Abilene, Texas. Dyess Air Force Base, located about 7 miles southwest of downtown Abilene, is home to the 7th Bomb Wing and the 317th Airlift Wing. The 7th Bomb Wing operates B-1B Lancer supersonic bombers, aircraft capable of flying at speeds exceeding Mach 1.2 and delivering a wide range of conventional weapons across intercontinental distances. The 317th operates C-130J Super Hercules transport aircraft. Together, these two wings give Dyess one of the most operationally significant mission profiles of any Air Force installation in the country. The B-1B is no longer capable of delivering nuclear weapons. That mission was removed in the 1990s under arms reduction treaties, but it remains one of the most capable long-range conventional strike aircraft in the world. The operational details surrounding its missions are classified, and the access restrictions at Dyess reflect that reality directly. Dyess is named after Lieutenant Colonel William Edwin Dyess, a native of Albany, Texas, who was captured by Japanese forces at Bataan in April 1942 and spent nearly 2 years in brutal captivity at various prison camps in the Philippines. He escaped in April 1943, one of the few American officers to do so, and made his way back to the United States with detailed first-hand accounts of what was happening in the camps. He died in a plane crash in California in December 1943, just before he could testify publicly. The base named for him has been operational since 1942 and is not a place you visit without paperwork, a clearance, and a very specific reason to be there. Number 4. Fort Cavazos, Killeen, Texas. Fort Cavazos, which was known as Fort Hood until it was renamed in 2023 in honor of General Richard Cavazos, the first Hispanic 4-star general in the history of the United States Army, is one of the largest military installations in the world. It covers approximately 214,000 acres in central Texas and serves as the home of the 3rd Armored Corps, which coordinates Army operations across multiple theaters. This is the kind of installation that has its own zip codes, its own school district, its own police department, its own hospital system, and its own internal economy. More than 40,000 soldiers are stationed here, along with their families, in what amounts to a small city embedded inside a major military training and operational complex. The town of Killeen, which grew up alongside the base over decades, has a population of over 150,000 people, one of the larger cities in central Texas, built almost entirely around the military presence. The training areas of Fort Cavazos include live fire ranges, helicopter training zones, and armored vehicle maneuver areas that cover enormous portions of the installation's 214,000 acres. Entry through the gates requires military identification or a verified civilian appointment. The perimeter of the installation is clearly marked and actively monitored. The 3rd Armored Corps, headquartered here, has deployed to combat zones repeatedly over the past 3 decades, and the operational security around the base reflects that reality directly. One useful thing to know: Killeen has real restaurants and real things to do. The 1st Cavalry Division Museum is open to authorized visitors and is genuinely worth the stop. The base proper, however, is not a sightseeing destination, and the gates are staffed by people who take that distinction very seriously. Number 3. Camp Bullis, San Antonio, Texas. Camp Bullis is a 27,990-acre training installation operated as part of Joint Base San Antonio, located northwest of the city in Bexar County. It is used primarily for field medical training, combat medic certification, and wilderness survival courses, and it supports training activities for JBSA and visiting military units year-round. The 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry, also trains here for urban warfare scenarios. What makes Camp Bullis particularly notable as a restricted site is not just the federal access protocols, it's the physical reality of what happens there. Live fire exercises are a regular part of the training calendar. The terrain is rough, Texas hill country limestone and cedar, which is beautiful to look at from a distance, and genuinely unforgiving if you end up in the middle of it without preparation or authorization. The combination of active weapons training and rugged terrain means that unauthorized entry carries physical risks well beyond a simple trespassing charge. The installation is named after Brigadier General John Lapham Bullis, who commanded the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts on the Texas frontier in the 1870s and 1880s, leading some of the most effective ranging operations of the post-Civil War period. He fought in more than 24 engagements without losing a single scout killed. The land that bears his name has been used for military training since the early 20th century. People still try to wander in from the surrounding hill country. The training ranges and security patrols ensure that the educational nature of that experience is somewhat different from what they expected, and considerably less pleasant. Number 2. Pantex Plant, Carson County, Texas. The Pantex Plant is in a category by itself. Located 17 miles northeast of Amarillo in Carson County, on a 16,000-acre site straddling U.S. Highway 60 and State Highway 293. Pantex is the United States' only nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility. Not one of, the only one. Since 1975, Pantex has been the nation's primary site for the assembly, disassembly, retrofit, and life extension of nuclear weapons. During the Cold War, the plant served as the final assembly point for roughly 70,000 nuclear warheads. Since 1991, when the last new nuclear weapon was completed, Pantex has focused on dismantling weapons retired from the stockpile and on maintaining the safety and reliability of the weapons that remain active. Approximately 6,000 acres of the site are leased from Texas Tech University, which serves as a buffer zone for security purposes. The plant was originally built in 1942 as a conventional bomb factory for World War II, producing nearly 4 million conventional bombs and artillery shells in 3 years of heavy production. When the war ended in August 1945, the plant closed and the land was leased to Texas Technological College, now Texas Tech University, for $1. which used it for experimental cattle feeding operations. In 1951, the Atomic Energy Commission reclaimed the site and converted it to nuclear weapons work. Texas Tech did not get the dollar back. The security at Pantex is exactly what you would expect from the facility responsible for America's nuclear arsenal. The plant maintains its own military-grade security force, divided into classified security zones. One section, known internally as Zone 11, serves as an experimental explosive test site. The FAA has designated the airspace above and around the plant as Prohibited Area P-47, meaning civilian aircraft cannot fly over it. Even standing idle near the perimeter fence is likely to result in detainment and questioning by the plant's security force, which is not made up of people who enjoy ambiguity about intentions. A former plant employee, speaking to a journalist years ago, described the experience of working there as one where you never quite forget what's inside the building next to you. That is an understatement. Whatever is inside the buildings at Pantex is, under the right circumstances, capable of ending a city. The restricted access is not optional, it is the entire point. Number 1. The restricted ranchlands of West Texas. And then there's this. No list of forbidden places in Texas is complete without acknowledging the sheer scale of private land in this state and what it means for access. Texas is unusual among American states in that the vast majority of its land, roughly 95%, is privately owned. When the federal government was distributing public lands to western states in the 19th century, much of Texas was already the property of the Texas Republic, and then the state of Texas itself, which sold or granted most of it to private individuals, railroads, and land companies, rather than transferring it to federal ownership. The result is a state where almost everywhere you might want to go belongs to someone, and that someone has very specific thoughts about whether you are welcome. In West Texas in particular, private ranches cover millions of acres. Some of these properties are larger than small northeastern states. The Wagoner Ranch, once the largest contiguous ranch under a single fence in the United States at nearly 800,000 acres, stretched across 6 Texas counties. The King Ranch in South Texas covers about 825,000 acres, larger than the entire state of Rhode Island, and has been a single privately owned operation since the 1850s. Even the smaller ranches in areas like the Trans-Pecos, the Edwards Plateau, and the Panhandle are enormous by most Americans' understanding of what private property means. Texas law on trespassing is clear, and the consequences are real. A trespassing conviction in Texas can result in fines and jail time, and it goes on your record. But more practically, in a state where many landowners are armed as a matter of routine and where property rights are treated as something approaching a sacred principle, showing up uninvited on private ranch land is not simply a legal problem. It is a social one. The sign says, "No trespassing." The fence says, "No trespassing." The cattle guard and the locked gate say, "No trespassing." Everything about the landscape says, "No trespassing." Texas has a saying about it. Fences aren't just to keep the cattle in. They're also to keep everything else out. That philosophy applies to 95% of the state's landmass. If you're standing in West Texas, looking at something you want to explore, and there's a fence between you and it, the answer is almost certainly no. Texas has more than enough places to visit legitimately. Big Bend National Park, Guadalupe Mountains, the Riverwalk in San Antonio, Palo Duro Canyon, Padre Island National Seashore, the Gulf Coast, and more cities worth exploring than you could get to in a month of road trips. The state is enormous, and most of it will welcome you with varying degrees of barbecue, live music, and genuine Texas hospitality. The 13 places on this list, however, are not in that category. Whether it's nuclear warheads waiting at Pantex, classified intelligence training at Goodfellow, supersonic bombers at Dyess, combat medics training on live ranges at Camp Bullis, or a West Texas rancher who didn't put up all those fence posts just so you could walk through them, the message is consistent. Some places are off limits for reasons that range from sensible to absolutely non-negotiable. Texas is a state that has always had a complicated relationship with the idea of limits. The culture prizes independence, self-sufficiency, and the freedom to move through the world on your own terms. But the places on this list exist outside that cultural arrangement. They are governed by federal law, military necessity, classified operations, genuine physical danger, and, in the case of the private ranchlands, the deeply held belief of millions of Texans that the property line is not a suggestion. Respect the signs, respect the fences, and save your curiosity for the places that actually want to see you. Texas has more than enough of those. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more content like this.